Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Trilokanath Prabhu, since you're leaving early, I'm going to put you on the spot. What did we talk about yesterday?
Sambandha, Abhidaya, and Prayoja.
Jai, what about them?
They're very important in our spiritual life.
Because?
Because we have to know what is Sambandha. Without understanding of Sambandha, we cannot go to our goal.
Mm-hmm.
So we must know our Sambandha, we must know the goal. Where should we move?
Uh-huh.
We must know the path.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Anything else from yesterday?
You gave the example with brushing our teeth. And you explained how we should know all the elements of the process, and we should know specifically how to do everything, like where do we put the toothpaste, how we are holding the brush. And even if one of the things is wrong, then we will miss the ultimate result.
True. Anything to add?
And I was thinking also that Sambandha and religion is not just a theological concept. It's not theoretical. Because it applies in every sphere of life. It doesn't matter whether you're Gaudiya, Vaishnava, or whatever you are, even if you're atheist, you still have to focus on Sambandha with religion. Maybe you don't call it in this way, but it doesn't matter. I mean, like you were giving the example of the map yesterday. First of all, when you see the map, then usually there is a red point and it says arrow, you are here, so that's Sambandha. And then wherever you want to go, that's your Prayojana, and then you follow the streets and look for the best road there, that's there.
Yeah.
It's universal, it's not just
Everything.
theoretical.
Good. Chandrika, what do you remember from yesterday?
I really like one sentence you said.
Just the one. Go ahead.
Taste is when we want to do something, but when we have attachment, we can not live without doing.
Yes.
That can really.
Good. Jai. Okay, so I know that people were paying attention, that's good. So what we left off with yesterday was we were talking about how humans, animals, insects, and reptiles are conscious entities, and they have the power to discern and desire. And then of these conscious entities, humanity has the greatest power of discernment. For this reason, some people call mankind the master of all living and non-living entities. So there's a footnote there. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th Canto, 9th chapter, verse 28. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, expanding His own potency, Maya Shakti, created innumerable species of life to house the conditioned souls. It's an interesting turn of phrase that we are the soul, the living entity, and these bodies, whether it's human or animal or plant, it's just a residence, it's a house, temporary house of the soul. Continuing. Yet by creating the forms of trees, reptiles, animals, birds, snakes, and so on, the Lord was not satisfied within His heart. Then He created human life, which offers the conditioned soul sufficient intelligence to perceive the absolute truth, and He became pleased. So notice So we're talking about, and yesterday we talked about how humans among the species in this world are considered superior in a sense. But we also talked about how we misuse this, and that we think that we're superior to everything. But there's nothing superior to us. Sure, we're superior to the animals, the birds, and the beasts for only this reason, because we have the power, we have sufficient intelligence to perceive the absolute truth. That's why we're considered superior. Now, if we don't do that, if we don't use our intelligence to perceive the absolute truth, if we use our intelligence to live more comfortably in the material world, or we learn how to exploit others, whether they're animals, trees, reptiles, or other human beings, or if we use that so-called intelligence to deny the existence of anything superior to us, because we're superior to the animals, the trees, and the reptiles, so we're just they were the ultimate superior living entity, right? There's no God, there's no devatas, there's nothing else. Everything revolves around us, right? And so this is a misuse of that term. And it's clear in Srimad Bhagavatam what that superiority is, where it ends, right? And so it just means that we have sufficient intelligence to perceive the absolute truth, and that's it. So we have to utilize it properly. Okay, continuing. The Lord is the creator of all living and non-living entities. Since he does not have a material body, we cannot see him. He is the perfect, the complete form of pure consciousness. He is our creator, protector, and controller. Footnote 3. This is also 11th canto. Chapter 3, verse 35. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of the creation, maintenance, and destruction of this universe, yet he has no prior cause. He pervades the various states of wakefulness, dreaming, and unconscious deep sleep, and also exists beyond them. By entering the body of every living being as the Supersoul, he enlivens the body, senses, life airs, and mental activities, and thus all the subtle and gross organs of the body begin their functions. My dear King, know that personality of Godhead to be the Supreme. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur starts out this chapter first offering those obeisances to Lord Chaitanya because of this conversation he had with Sanatana Goswami. Then he's talking about the three objects in the universe: matter, conscious living entities, and the Lord. So we talked about matter, we talked about the conscious living entities, and now we're talking about the Lord. And yesterday, when we were talking about this idea, this ludicrous idea that we, living entities, can be in control of everything, right? And I mentioned that we don't even control our own bodily functions, right? And so here it's being revealed that Krishna, who is the super soul in everyone's heart, he's taking care of all it. We're certainly not taking care of it. We couldn't consciously do any of that, right? There are periods of time when a human being will take over some of these functions. It's called CPR, right? So someone loses their consciousness, and so someone will, basically pump your heart for you, right? But you can't do that for a very long time. And also there's machines that can do that for a certain amount of time. But it's the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Super Soul that makes sure all of the functions are happening. We can understand some of the functions, and we can sort of come up with temporary solutions when these functions aren't behaving the way that we want them to. But ultimately, the cause of all of that is the Supreme Lord within our hearts. So, matter, conscious entities, and the Supreme Lord. And we have to know where we fit into that and how everything works. Continuing with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. By his will, we prosper. By his will, we meet with destruction. In his personal form, he is master of Vaikuntha. He is the Lord of all lords. By his command, all the universes move. Right? So we know that not a blade of grass moves without his will. So as we mentioned yesterday, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur also started out talking about how there are countless different philosophies, and they're all attempting to reach the truth. But they're incomplete and they conflict with one another because everyone has their own idea of how the world should be based on their own experience. We can't see outside of our own experience. So as long as we try to base a philosophy on that, there's going to be an infinite amount of different philosophies, and none of them are actually going to be correct, right? So some of these philosophies that we mentioned yesterday, one of them is called deism. This happened when, or this philosophy came about when there were these preachers of religion that are talking about how God is absolute. Everything comes from Him, and He can do anything. He's all-powerful. And so people were starting to think, well, if God can do anything, He's all-powerful, then why is this material world so miserable? So these brilliant minds came up with this very clever idea that actually God is all-powerful, but not in this material world. This is called deism. The material world is outside of His realm, right? So He has nothing. No, He created it, but He has nothing to do with it.
I think Thomas Jefferson was a deist.
He may have been, actually, yeah, I think he was mentioned by Sahotra Maharaj. There are many of them, because, and it's easy to sort of wrap your head around because it's the easiest way to, make sense of it without actually hearing from the proper source what's actually going on, right? Because we conditioned living entities, we don't want anything to be our fault. Anytime something bad happens, we're always looking at someone else to blame, or just even if it's a circumstance, right? It doesn't have to be someone. It's better if it is, because then we can hate that person forever. But we need something to blame, right? And so we don't like this idea necessarily of, we like the idea of good karma. We like the fact that if we do something nice, we can get something nice in return. But we don't like to think that the reason we're suffering is because we did something terrible before, right? No. I couldn't have done something that terrible. There's no way. Me? I'm a saint. I'm an angel. Come on now. So these guys came up with this idea that, okay, no, He just doesn't have the power here in this material world. Which, when you think about it, is kind of ludicrous, but it logically, at least, explains why, in this particular situation, He seems to not have power. Actually, He does have the power, and what it says here, He is our creator, protector, and controller. By His will we prosper, and by His will we meet with destruction. Right? So anything we experience, whether good or bad, that's how we perceive it. We perceive things as good and bad in this material world. It's all sanctioned by Krishna's will. In Caitanya Siksamrita, it's pointed out that these things that we perceive as good and bad in this material world, it's actually an improper conception. Everything is bad in this material world because everyone's trying to live independently from what Krishna is trying to provide, right? We're trying to take His position, be the controller of the world. I hope you live. But it's Krishna's will that you're coughing right now. You're fine. Right. So it's by His will and by His command that all of the universes move. And so there are countless universes. And He's in control of all of them. Again, we can't even control our own lives, our own bodies, our own schedules. But He controls all of these different universes. So He has the capacity to do that. We don't. That's why it's important for us to know the relationship, who we are, who He is. Then we can act accordingly. Then, as the Lord does not have the gross form of material objects, we cannot perceive Him with our senses. Because of this, He is called formless in the Vedas. However, as all objects have their own form, the Lord also has His form. And then there's a footnote from Brahma Samhita, 532. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, and substantiality, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of that transcendental figure possesses in itself the full-fledged functions of all the organs, and eternally sees, maintains, and manifests the entire universe as both spiritual and mundane. So it's not that Krishna doesn't have a form, but he's called formless in the Vedas because he doesn't have a material form. He doesn't have a form like we have. Now again, the Mayavadis, they take phrases? Statements. They take statements like this in the Vedas to say that no, actually the Supreme Lord is formless. He has no form, whether spiritual or material. And because here in the material world, they use logic to explain it. Here in the material world, we have these forms and they're miserable, they're temporary. So therefore the eternal can't have a form because form means temporary. But actually just material means temporary, whether it's form, whether it's idea, whether it's concept. The difference between spirit and matter is consciousness. Everything that's material goes through 6 phases. It comes into being, it grows, it remains for some time, it produces some byproducts, it dwindles, and it dies. It goes through those 6. Spirit is eternal. It's full of cognition, means there's no aspect of illusion whatsoever. And it's full of bliss. There's no misery. That's the difference between spirit and matter. So, just understanding that, the difference between spirit and matter, we can now understand the difference between spiritual forms and material forms. Spiritual forms are eternal, full of bliss and knowledge. Material forms go through those 6 transformations. So Krishna's form is eternal, it's full of bliss and it's full of knowledge. And in this verse from Brahma Samhita, we also understand that it's not limited like our form. So our form, our eyes see, but that's it, that's all they do. They just do that one function, right? We have to hear through our ears, we can't hear with our hands. We can't eat with our feet. So for Krishna it would work about the toothbrush, putting it in his ear, that could work for him. But for us it just doesn't work. So he can perform any of the functions with any part of his body because it's absolute, it's spiritual. So there's a difference between the forms that we have here in the material world and the forms in the spiritual world. That's actually our form as well. We have that form. But currently it's covered because we misused our free will. We're identifying with the false ego instead of the real ego. And we think that we are controllers and enjoyers of this material world. Okay, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues. Only material objects have material form. Conscious living entities have a conscious or spiritual form, Caitanya Svarup. Human beings, although spiritual entities, additionally have a material body. Thus, our spiritual form has become hidden within the material form. The Lord is pure consciousness or spirit. That is, he has no form except his spiritual form. This spiritual form is his body. We can see this form only with our pure spiritual eyes. We cannot see it with material eyes. Footnote 5, also from Brahma Samhita, this is verse 38. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Shyamasundara, Krishna himself, with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eye of devotion, tinged with the salve of love. So oftentimes we encounter atheists, and this could mean that we encounter them on the street, or in our families, or in our minds. right? Sometimes we have atheistic tendencies that are still there in our minds and come up with some arguments. But sometimes some of the arguments that the atheist makes are, well, if God exists, then just show him to me, and then I'll believe you, right? So their idea is that if they can't see it with their own eyes, then they shouldn't believe it. They don't have to accept it, right? Of course, this is kind of ludicrous as well, because there are so many things that we believe in that we don't see, right? We take a lot of things on faith. I, for example, have never been to the North Pole, but I've heard that it exists, and I accept that, right? I don't have to go there to say, okay, it doesn't matter to me actually, but sure, there it is. Or any other country that I haven't been to for that matter. There are also things that are too small for us to see, but they affect our lives, right? In mathematics, there are concepts that cannot be defined, but we rely on them completely in order to do just normal functions in life. So there's so many things that we can't really perceive with our own senses directly, but we can perceive the results of them. So, for example, we can perceive beyond all doubt and attempts at material logic to prove it wrong, that there is a soul within this body. We can't really see it, we can't weigh it. We know that it's 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair, so it's too small to see even with a microscope. But we understand that we can perceive the difference between a live body and a dead body, right? But if chemically we analyze a live body and just after the soul has left the body, all the same chemicals are there. And there's nothing that we can add chemically to a dead body to make it alive again. So it's something that we can simultaneously perceive beyond all logical doubt, but we can't actually see it, per se. So in the same way, we can't see God with our material eyes, right? He has only a spiritual form, and until we have spiritual consciousness, until we're properly utilizing our free will, identifying with our real ego, which is I am the servant of Krishna, then we can see Krishna. So as it's saying in Brahma Samhita here, the pure devotees, not just the aspiring Vaishnavas, but the pure devotees, they're able to see in their heart of hearts, with the eyes of devotion, tinged with the salve of love, Krishna's form. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues, many unfortunate people do not believe in God, for their eye of knowledge is closed. Because they cannot see the Lord's form with their material eyes, they say he does not exist. Just as the blind may not understand the nature of sunlight, atheists cannot believe in the existence of God. Footnote 6. This is Bhagavad Gita, 16th chapter, verse 7 and 8. Those who are demoniac do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness, nor proper behavior, nor truth is found in them. They say that this world is unreal, with no foundation, no God in control. They say it is produced of sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Right? So as we mentioned, as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned, there are countless philosophies, all attempting to reach the truth. Many of those philosophies, as mentioned in this verse in Bhagavad Gita, revolve around sex desire, because this is quite a popular thing. There aren't many people in this world who are free from sex desire. So that becomes the driving force of most people's activities, right? And we see this in advertisements. Even a long time ago, when the advertisements you see were much more modest, they were still using sexuality to sell things, right? I remember the one time I was on my way to Philadelphia for my guru's Vyasa Puja, and I was driving by a bank, and there was a big sign on the window of the bank, and it said, "Sexy mortgage rates." And I was like, what could possibly be sexy about a mortgage rate? You know, it's mortgage literally, huh? Attractive? I guess. But it also reminded me of, there was this, so Srila Prabhupada, he used to go for morning walks with his disciples. And there was this one incident where they're walking through like a very industrial area. So there's like these big ships coming in and these big cranes and huge metal structures. And so Srila Prabhupada said to his disciples, "Okay, what is this?" And the disciples were saying, "Oh, this is Ugra Karma, Srila Prabhupada, you know, this like industrial sort of these activities that people do." Well, what else? And people were giving these different ideas of what this was representing. And then Srila Prabhupada said, "Sex desire." And everybody's like, "What? How?" It's like, shit. But it's true, all of these things were there because people want to enjoy. And they think that in order to enjoy the topmost, they have to have all of the topmost facilities, right? You have to have the best car. You have to have the nicest bed, Hiranyakashipu. You have to have the gold and you have to have the pillows, right? And this idea of sex desire doesn't always mean just gross sex desire. It also just means subtle enjoyment, right? So a lot of things we're after, that's our motive. When we pick out anything, it's because of that, because we want to enjoy. When we pick out the food that we want to eat, what's going to make me enjoy the most? Usually it's not what's going to be the best for my health. It's what am I going to get the most enjoyment out of, right? So many of the philosophies, or we could say most of the philosophies, revolve around that. Bhagavad Gita mentions it, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions it. And so in their eyes, the world has no cause other than lust. That's it. That's it. That's the end all be all. And so you have the right to pursue your happiness. And that's it. And as long as we have that mentality, then yeah, we will remain here in this material world pursuing our happiness. The thing about the pursuit of happiness is that you never actually get it.
That's in the Constitution.
Yes, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right. And so just like, you know, there's also the American dream that we hear about. You have to actually be sleeping in order to experience it because it's not real, it's a dream. And the pursuit of happiness, you never get it. It's always a pursuit. But actual happiness is available. It's there. It's actually here, right? Our nature, our body, our real body, the spiritual body, is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge. So the bliss, it's there. But right now it's covered because we misused our free will. So the happiness that we're looking for and that we're struggling so hard to attain, it's actually there and it's quite accessible. But the way to do that is not through all these different philosophies that people have come up with to try to figure out what the goal of life is and what the process is to get to that goal, but it comes from Shastra. Okay, continuing. Although all human beings by their very nature believe in God, if they learn duplicitous logic through bad association from childhood, they gradually become overcome by that bad influence and disbelieve in the Lord's existence. That, of course, is their loss. It is no loss for the Lord. We also like to think that in relationships, especially here in the material world, we like to think of relationships as like a two-way thing. And they are, in one sense. In a lot of senses, relationship is all about it's a two-way street, give and take. But in the material world, we like to see it as, I need something from you, but you need something from me. I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back. It's a business transaction. It's not love usually. Like 99% of the time, it's not love. We do things out of necessity, out of a business transaction. Here, we learn that while we're pursuing our happiness here in the material world, it's no loss for the Lord at all, right? Of course, He would like to interact with us favorably, and that's the nature of all relationship. But He doesn't want to do it if we don't want to do it. If we don't want to, if we don't want to acknowledge His existence, He's not going to force us to, because the nature of love is that it has to be a choice. If it's just mechanical, then it's not really love, it's just function, right? So love can't be love unless we actually have this choice to not love. So currently we're exercising that choice to not love, and here we are, right? And it's no loss for Him at all. It's a loss for us because we're not actually engaged in our eternal nature. But it's not a complete loss for us because we always will have the opportunity to tap back into that pure consciousness, right? All we have to do is follow the process. So no loss for the Lord. Continuing. It should not be thought that Vaikuntha is a material place. Madras, Mumbai, Benares, Calcutta, London, and Paris are examples of material places. To go to these places, you must travel a great distance for a long time. The material body must be moved. Vaikuntha is not such a place. It has a different nature, transcending the material universes. Footnote 7, also from Brahma Samhita, this is verse 56. I worship that transcendental seat known as Shveta Dvip, where, as loving consorts, the Lakshmis, in their unalloyed spiritual essence, practice the amorous service of the Supreme Lord Krishna as their only lover, where every tree is a transcendental purpose tree, where the soil is the purpose gem. Water is nectar, every word is a song, every gait is a dance, the flute is the favorite attendant, effulgence is full of transcendental bliss, and the supreme spiritual entities are all enjoyable, whereas numberless milk cows always emit transcendental oceans of milk, where there is eternal existence of transcendental time, who is ever present and without past or future, and hence is not subject to the quality of passing away, even for the duration of half a moment. That realm is known as Goloka, only to a very few self-realized souls in this world.
Can you explain the verse?
Yes, I can. You are excused, Prabhu. We're not going to make you feel weird about standing up and leaving. Right? No one's going to make them feel weird about it? Everybody's going to make them feel very comfortable about leaving. And
Sorry.
we'll see you again soon. Thank you for coming.
Don't forget about
Yes. To make up for his leaving early, he's given us some Dhameshvara Mahaprabhu Mahaprasadam, which the people who stay the whole time actually can get. If you leave early, you can't get it. Actually, you can, but...
Ekadashi?
See, that's what I asked, and he wasn't sure, but he said it's Maha. Anyway, I don't know.
Can keep it for Thursday.
Hare Krishna. You can keep it for tomorrow. And break. That's a good thing to break fast with tomorrow. So you want me to explain this verse? Okay. So, yeah, start from the beginning. So we're talking about... Well, we don't have to do the whole thing. So the nature of the spiritual world, basically everything is transcendental. It's not like the material things. So we know what material trees do, right? They go through the 6 transformations. They come into being, they grow, they remain for some time, they produce some fruits, they gradually dwindle, and then they die. And they're also limited. So an apple tree can only give a very specific kind of apple. Unless you splice different branches on it, then they can give a couple different kinds of apples, maybe even some pears. But they're limited. The trees in the spiritual world, they're eternal, first off. They've always existed. They don't come into being. They don't need to grow. They're just producing all sorts of unlimited fruit. And it's whatever fruit you want. It's not limited at all. So that's the trees. Then the soil, even the dust, let alone the rocks, even the just grains of dust are chintamani. It's a special gem that whatever you wish for, you get. Wish-fulfilling touchstone. Some people also just say that whatever you touch it with turns to gold because most people just want gold, right? But
This kind of tricky.
it can be tricky. Mr. Midas could.
Yeah, he can attest to that.
He can attest to that. That can become tricky. Yes, but it just it fulfills all of your desires, and it's nothing that you would feel inclined to sweep away. It's actually quite comfortable and fragrant, aromatic. It's like a soft bed, the dust of the spiritual world. Then water is nectar. So water here, it's nice. It keeps us hydrated. There, it's nectar. What more to say? Every word is a song. Every gate, every step is a dance. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So here, it's, there. Then, so everything is full of bliss and transcendental. Oh, then the milk cows. So the milk cows here, we get a certain amount of milk per day, and that's if the mama cow had a calf within a certain amount of years. Now, this is interesting. Even here in the material world, it's not like a set time. It's not like, okay, a mother cow can give milk for 1 year or 2 years. This is an interesting fact that if the mother cow is feeling loved and has just any sense of affection, she will continue to fill her milk bag for many, many years. Example, Mother Kalini, she's a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. She's left this planet. She lived in Gita Nagari for a very long time, and she had a cow that she took care of personally. This cow only had one calf in its entire life, and it gave milk for 14 years after that, because Mother Kalini and this cow had so much affection for one another that the cow just kept producing milk, right? So when devotees are involved in this material world, you see reflections of the spiritual world, because the difference between the material world and the spiritual world is just a matter of consciousness, right? So just as we have the spiritual body there, it's just covered by polluted consciousness. The things that we're experiencing here in the material world, if we're interacting with them properly, according to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, engaging everything in Krishna's service, we can start seeing that spiritual nature. That's an interesting. So then, what was next? Oh, time. This is a great one. So ever present, no past, no future, right? So time exists in the spiritual world in the sense that, you can read about certain pastimes that happen at night, right? Certain ones happen during the day. So time exists there. But time in the spiritual world is only there to serve the pastime. It doesn't, so here in the material world, time dictates what we do, right? Okay, now it's time to get up, now it's time to eat, now it's time to do this. And time just keeps churning, right? And we can't stop it, we can't do anything about it. That's how it goes. In the spiritual world, time serves the pastimes. So when Krishna, for example, wants to dance with his lovely cowherd damsels, then it's a full moon night. And it's going to stay a full moon night because that's what they're doing. Everything in the spiritual world works like that. When Krishna is playing with his cowherd boy friends, it's daytime and they're in the forest, and even though the month that it happens to be may not be generally suitable for a certain type of flower, those flowers are there, so are the fruits. And the fruits are actually, the trees are actually bowing down so that Krishna can just pop them right off of the branches. He doesn't have to climb unless he wants to. If he wants to climb, then he'll climb. But they're happy to offer their obeisances and offer their fruits to him. Everything in the spiritual world is conscious. And everything in the spiritual world is happy to serve Krishna. Nothing is there in the spiritual world that is resentful of anything. Everything is harmonious. There's an option to be resentful, but as soon as that resent shows up, here we are. We've done that. Here we are. We're here in this material world because of that. Is that good? That's good for that? Okay. So then Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues, referring to the spiritual world. It is conscious, eternal, and faultless. Vaikuntha is not perceived by the material eye, nor conceived of by the material mind. The Supreme Lord resides in this inconceivable place. If a person is able to please the Lord, they can go to that world and serve him eternally. What is called happiness in this world is not eternal. It remains for a short time and then disappears. Everything of this world is filled with suffering. Birth itself is difficult, a cause for sorrow. After birth, we must nourish the body with food. If we have no food, we suffer. There is always some sort of affliction, such as excessive heat or cold. To rid ourselves of suffering, we have to undergo bodily suffering in earning money. If we do not build a house, we do not have a place to stay. On getting married, we have to raise children. When old age finally approaches, it seems that we are left with nothing. Throughout life, we suffer through argument and disagreement with others. There is no such thing as pure happiness in this world. Therefore, people compromise by accepting happiness as the momentary cessation of grief or want. However, it is very difficult to live in such a world. Right? This idea that most of what we consider to be happiness in this world is just a momentary cessation of our suffering, of the pain, right? That's what we consider happiness. So one time, I was at a seminar in Gita Nagari, usually for Memorial Day and Labor Day, since it's like an extra day in the weekend. The devotees would gather at Gita Nagari and senior devotees would give these classes. So during one such retreat, we were having class in the old temple room, the Prasadam hall now. And there was this very annoying buzzing. We don't know where the sound was coming from. It was kind of like yesterday with the crackling up in the air conditioning, but it was a constant thing. It wasn't an occasional thing, it was constant. So everyone had to adjust. So all of the audience was leaning forward so they can actually tune in to hear. The speaker was speaking extra loud. And then all of a sudden, the noise stopped, and it just felt like such a relief, right? Just the cessation of that annoyance felt like, oh, this is, right? Now we can, now we can just hear without, putting so much endeavor in. So a lot of our so-called happiness is like that. It's just a cessation of our suffering. The food we eat doesn't even really make us happy. It just takes away our hunger. Certain foods can make us a little bit happier, depending, on what our tastes are. But true happiness, as defined in the Shastra, spiritual bliss, it doesn't go through these 6 changes. It's just eternal. And it's also ever increasing, right? We don't have experience of that in this world. We have experience of something starting and getting better, but then it comes to an apex and then it fades off, right? This is the so-called happiness of the material world. It goes up and then it goes down. real happiness is ever increasing. And so it's hard for us with material consciousness to perceive of such a thing, but it exists. So also the thing with material so-called happiness is when we're pursuing it, because we never really have it. When we're pursuing it, even when we're getting what we consider to be happiness, what we consider happy, the same activities done in the same way, under the same circumstances, will no longer produce the same amount of happiness, because we've already experienced that. Now we want more. So now we have to do something better. We have to change the formula a little bit, right? So when I was a young teenager, I mentioned yesterday that I used to skateboard. And so happiness came from doing tricks that we never landed before. So when we finally landed a trick that we were trying to do for a very long time, we were so excited about it. Very, 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 very happy. And then we landed it 6 more times and it's just like, it's standard now. Now we needed to do something else, right? You know, going down a set of 6 steps. We've done that, now we got to do 7, now we got to do 8, now we got to do 9. It becomes more dangerous after a while too. Our pursuit of happiness, just to get that same feeling, we actually have to put ourselves in much more danger to get that feeling, right? And then we break our arms and, you know, all sorts of things like that. So it's this strange concept that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is explaining so vividly here about how our pursuit of happiness is just a wrestling with pursuing that happiness and temporary cessation of that happiness, all the different amounts of suffering that we have to go through in order to try to maintain the things that we think that are going to keep us happy. And as he concludes in this paragraph, it's very difficult to live in such a world, right? Because our nature, we are spirit soul. Our nature is to have that eternal, ever-increasing happiness, right? That's why when something is having a crescendo, when something's building up, whether it's music or whatever, the buildup is, that's what we really feel. When we get to that apex, we no longer have that buildup anymore. It can't get better than that, and now we know it's going down. So we do have this experience of happiness increasing, and that's the reason why that's so appealing to us, right? But happiness does, it continues to expand, because the example, so Srila Prabhupada gives it, my guru gives this example all the time, is when Sri Krishna is interacting with Srimati Radharani. Of course, we know that he's the most beautiful, he's the most everything, Bhagavan, he possesses all of the opulences in full. So, but when Srimati Radharani sees Krishna's beauty, she becomes extremely happy. And then her beauty increases because she's happy. When we're happy, you know, we even in the material world, when someone's happy, they kind of glow. You can see that they're happy. And it's actually attractive to see someone that's happy. Unless you're envious of that person, then you're saying, well, why do they get to be happy? I should be happy, right? But we are still attracted to the happiness, we just don't want them to have it, right? So when Srimati Radharani's happiness and beauty are increasing, then Krishna is seeing that, and then his happiness is increasing, which then increases his beauty. And it keeps going forever and ever and ever and ever, right? And so this is actual bliss, ever increasing. So there's never that moment where you're reaching the pinnacle of happiness. There's always more, right? This is the nature of the spiritual world. And this is why we, spiritual beings, can't be satisfied in this material world, because we're dealing with knockoff merchandise. It's not real. It's shadow. It's not even substance. It's not substantial, right? So this is why it is very difficult to live in the material world. Okay, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues. If we attain the Lord's abode, we do not experience temporary happiness and distress, but rather attain ultimate and eternal joy. To this end, we must try to satisfy the Lord, right? So if we want the real bliss, that comes by satisfying the Supreme Lord. So this month we're in Kartik. I'm sure everyone has been going to the temple to offer the lamps to the Lord.
Yeah.
And when we sing this Damodarastaka, we find out that Krishna is actually conquered and overwhelmed by pure loving devotion. We see that Krishna, who's unlimited, was actually bound by a rope, which is quite limited, right? And of course, initially, Mother Yashoda, she's tying together every rope she could possibly find, and it's always 2 fingers too short. How is that? I just added 6 more ropes, and it's still 2 fingers too short. Of course, that's not hard to conceive when you understand that Krishna is everything. Everything comes from him, so you can't bind everything with part of everything. But Krishna understood that his mother she just had his best interest in mind. She loved him. She didn't want him to cause so much trouble. And when he saw that devotion, then he agreed to be bound because he's conquered and overwhelmed by pure love. This is what it means to satisfy the Lord. He doesn't take to things like bribery, for example, right? In the material world, with a lot of people that we're dealing with, they don't care about love and devotion. They're conquered and overwhelmed by money and power and respect. You give them those things, they'll give you what you want. This is not the transaction that we're looking for with Krishna. Krishna is pleased when we have this pure love, actual love, then he's pleased. So to this end, we must try to satisfy the Lord, and that's how to satisfy the Lord. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues, humanity's highest benefit starts with attempts to satisfy the Lord. But people begin this practice only after pure knowledge appears within. Footnote 8. This is Srimad Bhagavatam's 7th canto, 6th chapter, verse 1. One who is sufficiently intelligent should use the human form of body from the very beginning of life, in other words, from the tender age of childhood, to practice the activities of devotional service, giving up all other engagements. The human body is most rarely achieved, and although temporary, like other bodies, it is meaningful because in human life one can perform devotional service. Even a slight amount of sincere devotional service can give one complete perfection. Then that same chapter, verse 5, therefore, while in material existence, a person fully competent to distinguish wrong from right must endeavor to achieve the highest goal of life as long as the body is stout and strong and is not embarrassed by dwindling. So we have to take advantage of this knowledge while we can comfortably do so. There are at least a couple of us in this room whose bodies have already started this dwindling process, and things become much more difficult, standard things. I'm certainly not talking about you, Pura. Me, and there's a spider back there that's on its last legs. Daily activities become difficult, right? So while we are stout and strong, and we can perform these activities easier, it is in our best interest to really take this seriously, to take the process seriously. Because then if we do that, then when the body starts to dwindle, then we will have already awakened this transcendental tendency to be engaged in Krishna service. And the bodily limitations will no longer matter because our consciousness will be so fixed in serving Krishna that it won't matter if we can't walk or if we can't do whatever. We can still serve Krishna. But if we try to wait until then to begin to cultivate this, then it makes the process a lot more difficult. So I wouldn't recommend it. Continuing. Unfortunately, most people think that they can enjoy the world now and worship the Lord in old age. That, however, is unacceptable, for time is a precious commodity. Footnote 9. This is 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 9, text 29. After many, many births and deaths, one achieves the rare human form of life, which, although temporarily, affords one the opportunity to attain the highest perfection. Thus, a sober human being should quickly endeavor for the ultimate perfection of life, as long as his body, which is always subject to death, has not fallen down and died. After all, sense gratification is available even in the most abominable species of life, whereas Krishna consciousness is possible only for a human being. This is a very important point. When we're young especially, and we think that we have forever to live, we figure, yeah, let's enjoy our youth, and then sometime in the future, I'll get serious about Krishna consciousness, right? But if we analyze this, the pursuit of sense gratification, even the animals do that. So there was a story, it was Dinabandhu Prabhu told. Has everyone been to Vrindavan? Have you been to Vrindavan? Not yet. You'll go soon, I promise. I guarantee it. With friends like these, you'll be in Vrindavan before you know it. So in Vrindavan, there are some unique features that some people find hard to tolerate.
For example,
there are open sewers on the side of the road. Depending on where you walk, you have to be careful where you walk. So there are places where there's just a pipe coming out of the side of a building, and periodically just sewage comes out of that pipe. Also in Vrindavan there are wild pigs. They're kind of cute actually, but you don't want to mess with the bigger ones. So these wild pigs, their form of sense gratification is eating the stuff that comes out of that pipe. They love it. It's the best part of their day. When they see, or first they hear the sound, they hear, because the pipe goes go, 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 go first before it starts spewing out the stuff. So they hear that and they go running and they start tackling each other. It's like they're professional sports, professional rugby players. And so they're running after it as soon as they hear it, and they're knocking each other out of the way and tackling one another, and just to get that nectar, that precious substance. So when you observe something like that, especially as a human being, you start thinking, you know what? This pursuit of sense gratification is actually just silly. They're doing it. I'm doing the same thing. It just looks a little more polished. But it actually, from a spiritual point of view, what we're doing in pursuing our sense gratification is just as abominable as a pig eating sewage, right? Because what we're trying to settle for as happiness, this imitation happiness that's in this material world, is utter rubbish. It shouldn't even be called happiness. There should be a different word for it, right? When you compare it to actual bliss. So the sooner we realize that and take Krishna consciousness seriously, the better off we'll be. Because we don't want to keep coming back here in this material world and eating sewage. And we'll end on sewage today.
If I can
Yes.
add another footnote to this footnote.
Yes, please.
I'll quote your Guru Maharaj who once in lecture. He said, if I don't quote Shakespeare, my fans will be unhappy.
If I don't
quote Shakespeare,
quote
my
it.
fans will be unhappy. So, and he quoted Yudhishthira Sesha, who was not a good king. While he was in prison, he had the time to reflect. And he said, I wasted time, and now time wastes me. So this is about the wasting of time.
Yes.
And if you are thinking about these different philosophers,
Yeah.
and that you mentioned in the beginning, different ideologies, and there is one Western philosopher who started one of his books by saying, let's assume that the absolute truth is a woman. It's quite an opening of the book.
Uh-huh.
Let's assume that the absolute truth is a woman. So then he made the point, isn't it logical to conclude that because all these sages and philosophers over the years, over the centuries, because they were very inadequately dealing with, because they don't know how to deal with women. They are very pushy, very awkward. They are socially dysfunctional people normally, all these, professors, philosophers. So because of this, the absolute truth was not willing to reveal her secrets, and then they were just left standing there in dismay and disappointment, if standing at all. So this was the opening of. There's the first paragraph of one of his books. So I was thinking that you have these mantras for the singular, Vagisha, Ayasya, Vadaner, which means Vagisha is the name of the singular, that means the goddess of learning is always in his mouth. He's under his direction. She's always the goddess of eloquence, all these nice energies of the world. So unless we are connected to this, and absolute truth is a woman, actually, he got that right. So, but she serves the Supreme Lord, and therefore, under their protection, we can know the truth. Otherwise, we'll be standing there in dismay.
If standing at all.
Standing at all. Yes.
One more thing, if I may, about wasting time. So there's this famous story of a boatman. You may have all heard it. So there's this boatman. He's a simple fellow. He didn't go to school. His job is just to ferry people across this body of water. And so one day he picked up this very erudite scholar who just finished up getting his 5th PhD. And he wanted to return home to brag about his accomplishments. And so during this boat ride, this erudite scholar, he's talking to the boatman and he's like, so, have you studied mathematics and economics? And like that. And the boatman said, no. He said, oh, well then you've wasted 25% of your life. And he said, how about diplomacy? And he's just rattling off other subject matters. And the boatman said, no. He said, you've wasted 50% of your life. Then he starts rattling off even more, what's the word? Sotra Maharaj uses it all the time. It's even on this sign. Esoteric. He starts spouting off other esoteric topics. What do you know about these? Nothing? You've wasted 75% of your life. To the boatman, and the boatman is just, whatever. Then the boat springs a leak. It's filling with water, and it's sinking. And so the boatman turns to the erudite scholar, and he said, did you learn how to swim? And he said, no! And he said, you've wasted 100% of your life. and he swam to shore, because the boatman knows how to swim. So we have to understand what's important. I'm not saying swimming is important, and I'm not saying that knowledge is not important. But we have to understand what is important, and that's Krishna consciousness, and not waste our life on any material pursuits. Okay. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.